as intentioned as you are about like not wanting to kind of cross those two things in one, sometimes it just works. And yes, but generally it's nice to like kind of give it to somebody else. And like there was a couple of songs on Matt's record that were done by an outside mixer and just like were really cool and just sounded really different, and probably never would have happened the same way, even in just with panning and in the stereo field, like where things are placed and stuff like that. It's just, people have different ideas of where things should live and how they should sound. And
sure.
There's something to be said for that, for sure. So it's kind of a balance, but I think you're right, Brendan. It's probably ended up being more so that you end up mixing a lot of the stuff that we produce.
Yeah.
Nice. Wow. So tell me a bit about mastering. Do you choose the mastering engineer? Do artists you produce choose the mastering engineers? And I guess like, how does that work?
Yeah, it's kind of both. For the most part, we have a friend of ours named Zach Bodtorf, who I think he's in Vermont now, but we knew him. Him and I were in a band together in Charleston for a while, and he moved to LA, and now he's in Vermont, and he's an incredible mastering engineer. He was a guitar player first, and then got into mastering, and just in the last few years. But he's like this brilliant, like one of the most brilliant people I've ever met in my life. And his approach to mastering is so like spectacular. He actually co-produced the last Fragile Tomorrow record with us, because he kind of came in one day. He was doing some stuff on my solo record, and he came in and heard like the demos that we were doing and started like throwing out ideas. And I was like, all right, we have to have you like part of this record. So he co-produced it with us and Ted. And then with that record, for example, I think the label wanted to go in a different direction with mastering, and particularly because he co-produced it, they wanted somebody else to come on board. So, but what he did was sort of what he calls pre-mastering, which I can't even really explain how that kind of went, like what the process exactly is. It's very scientific, and very like data oriented, to where he actually went through and like looked at. Can you explain it better than I can, Brian? I don't really know.
Probably not, but
I've never heard of pre-mastering.
Yeah,
I think he coined I think he coined that phrase.
He may have.
This isn't really a concept outside of this record.
Yeah,
exactly.
He had developed some kind of program to, like, when he was working for like a coffee roaster, to measure the amount of water in the beans or something like that, and somehow used that same algorithm and applied it to music to analyze dynamics and EQ and stuff like that. And so he's tried to explain it to us a bunch of times, and it's just straight over my head.
We're gonna have to just hear it from the man himself.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah.
He'd be a great person to talk to. He's
he would, yeah.
Essentially, and he sent basically data like written out like probably in a PDF or something to the mastering engineer to sort of like identify like little noise clusters and things like that were like a specific database stuff. So that's like really, really cool. But his approach to mastering is probably somewhere between that and like just really his ear. Like he's got a really incredible ear, so he can kind of like fall in between. So we send him a lot of stuff to master. We've gotten records mastered by Greg Calby, the great Greg Calby, who's maybe the best there is.
Wow.
Maybe one of the best there is. That was kind of amazing to like. That was when we did. That was the first record we did with Mitch Easter, and he specifically was like you should just use Calby. Like he's the best. And so yeah, we've sent out stuff to him, and yeah, we've done that. We've primarily it kind of depends. But it's funny when you come across a very, very young band who maybe hasn't done anything recorded before or whatever, and they kind of ask, does it need to be mastered? And it's sometimes it's really hard to like impress upon somebody. Yes, it does need to be mastered. Like it's that. And that was also something that we learned, like over the years, is like what a difference that can make, in so many ways. So it really just depends. But we always like we really like to implore upon like younger bands that we work with that it's important.
There's
no matter what.
you always run into younger bands who are like, who are like almost release just the unmastered mixes, and you're like, please don't do that. Just like,
you have to like
get
communicate like, no guys,
yeah,
this is an MP3 file. You can't release this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we've run into that a handful of times.
Yeah, we have run into that.
Oh my god, it's the worst.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Listen, part of the job of being the producer is educating the artist about things that they don't know about. So.
Yeah, I mean,
totally.
we were in that position too of being educated.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, so many times that we've just learned stuff from somebody being like, no, this is how you're supposed to, like, don't jump, get ahead of yourself. Like this is the process. And so it's, both of us being non-confrontational and relatively shy people. It's hard to know when to speak up about stuff when it needs to be spoken, but like the more we make records and the more we produce, I think we've become a little more comfortable, kind of being like, all right, guys, like here's what you should know, like but every band has to kind of go through that process of learning things too.
Yeah, totally. So all of us go through periods where we're kind of like less inspired and we just kind of hit a wall. Like, what do you guys do to get past that and stay inspired?
I would say that actually So Sure is kind of a good example of us doing that, because we were like making this Fragile Tomorrow record, and we had recently produced a couple of projects and done this film score, and then things were kind of starting to feel a little bit like in the middle of the Fragile Tomorrow record. I think when the pandemic started and stuff, it was like, we knew we were going to have to stop, but it was also feeling like, we were trying to source a lot of different things and figure out what was working, what wasn't. And for me personally, it felt a little bit like I was getting less inspired the more I was doing it. I needed to step away and do something else. And this was like the perfect example of like, let's not lose whatever creative spark is still there, but let's funnel it into something else. And so it's usually just doing something different, trying a different project, or even like I remember a few years ago, I just for fun I decided to just record like a vocoder kind of weird circusy electronic version of a Split Enz song, just for fun, and so like that kind of stuff is stuff that like is really, really important. Another thing is for me personally, I'm also writing a book about a friend of ours band. They were kind of like a super group in the 90s that were sort of like lesser known, but kind of this critically revered thing. And that's been interesting because it's like creative in a different way. And I feel like I'm still being an artist in some way or another. So it's kind of like searching for something that feels good and sounds good and also reads good. And so that's something that I do personally, or I've been doing personally, that's kind of kept me excited creatively when
that's awesome.
Otherwise I'd probably be like, I don't know what to do with myself. Like, I'm not inspired, which has happened, plenty of times. But Brendan, I mean, what do you think? Like,
one thing that I find kind of important and helpful is like trying to almost like disassemble like what my philosophy on something is. Like if I'm trying to, write with effects or something like that, and it's just kind of like getting nowhere, sometimes I might be like, well, let me just like grab a handful of like random pedals and just sort of like put them in an order I would never put them in or something like that, and just kind of see where that gets me. For me, experimentation of just like in general is just like a big thing to kind of get me out of ruts, but also just kind of like going and trying to find, a video of someone just like explaining their process on, maybe a style of music that has nothing to do with what I do, and just trying to take something like from there has helped me a lot in like trying to be like, because I tend to sometimes get into like little periods where I might stumble on something that works, and then I just kind of keep doing it until it like drives me crazy. And so sure. Like, finding a new kind of like key to open up, something else has been a big thing of like, just kind of finding like some kind of piece of advice that sort of like makes something click for me. and kind of breaks me out of those ruts.
Well, I also feel like
Nice.
sometimes even just hearing a record that you haven't heard before, or like listening to something new, will just immediately do something to your brain. Like D'Angelo's last record came out in 2015, Black Messiah. Like the first time I heard that, I was like, whoa, okay. Like I was kind of in this weird place where I wasn't really writing a lot and stuff. And you get, even when you have like a studio, sometimes you just like, oh, I have to go to the studio and work with this band or whatever. Like it just feels like work, And like I heard that record and I was just like, oh my God, like reading about it and like, I mean, it took 17 years or whatever to make, but like just reading about, even just the guys that played on that record, you're just like, what? Like, this is crazy. And it sounded insane. You couldn't understand a word he was singing. I loved it. It was like right up my alley. It was just, it's one of the most like, it was a really like, it was like kind of a revelation for me hearing that record. And that's like one of those things too. Sometimes you just hear something and you just kind of like click. And similarly, I would say, I was just thinking about this when Bren was talking, and this is also part of the reason that So Sure is a thing now, because we played these shows in September in just Charleston and Savannah where we did, it was 3 weeks in a row, and each week we did a different album front to back. So the first was it
Remain in Light?
Oh yeah,
by the
Talking Heads, Remain in Light. The second was Loveless, which is
My Bloody Valentine.
which is like one of the greatest records of all time. And then the last was London Calling by The Clash, which is 19 songs.
That's a lot of songs.
Yeah, a lot of songs. And so
that was a big one.
that was and so that was like a kind of a thing where part of the intention behind it was we had toured the last record, and we're kind of we didn't do much touring, but it was like there was so much going on in our lives, like in our personal lives, that we kind of got burnt out really quick by it. Like my wife got pregnant and stuff like that, and I think we were just sort of like in this place where it was hard to get everybody together, and we just needed a break. So we just kind of like did the touring that we did, kind of stopped for a while, and then we kept thinking about what do we do to kind of like re-energize ourselves. And doing those shows was like this idea that we had, because it was like, oh, we could do some cool stuff and something different, maybe outside of our comfort zone, that could keep us playing music and keep us interested, but we're not playing the same songs we've been playing for a year and a half. And so
it's kind of like you've taken a card out of the like jam band book. I feel like that's something that like I think I've heard like the Disco Biscuits maybe or Fish have done.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. And that was the whole thing. Like let's just like figure out how to play. And Kyle played drums, because our drummer Josh couldn't do those shows, so Kyle came in and played drums, and particularly said yes because of Loveless, and because that was a record that he loved and Brendan and I loved particularly, and essentially we just kind of got together and didn't have much rehearsal. We kind of like trusted each other to learn the songs individually and then come together, a little bit before the shows and kind of put the pieces together and made sure everything sounded okay. We wrote out charts and stuff. It was like a whole new approach to playing songs and learning songs. And that was like, I think the best thing that could have happened to us, I think, at that point, because if we had just kind of not played shows for a while, it probably would have continued, and the pandemic would have happened, and then we couldn't play shows, and so I that was kind of like this re-energizing thing, and it also was the moment that we kind of like said to Kyle, hey, you like Loveless? We've sort of had this idea of doing a shoegaze band. You want to be in on it? And he was like, yeah, and it was kind of like a one day we'll do it thing. And then when this all happened, we sort of realized we had an opportunity. So yeah, that was a big moment too, but it's all different kinds of stuff that can kind of like get you out of that rut, which has happened to me so many times. And I remember when I was younger, like I wouldn't write songs for a while or whatever. And I'd think like, I'd get so panicked that I was never going to be able to write another song again, like, because I wasn't doing it all the time. And then as I got older, I sort of realized like, you don't have to write songs every day to be a songwriter or know how to write songs. Like you can just do it when it happens and it's not the end of the world. But like as a kid, it was like, it has to be a daily thing or else I'm going to lose it. But sometimes you just don't have it.
Interesting.
Sometimes you just don't have it. So it's,
scrap it, come back tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. And that's another, like just a thing that we've learned is just like, it's okay to let things go. And it's also okay to sometimes not have any inspiration at all either. And but something's going to snap you back into it sometime at some point, So
Right. Totally. So do you guys want to pitch your EP that's coming out now on the podcast?
Yeah. So the EP is called Caffeine Drip. Our band is So Sure. And it's, for anybody that likes Ride or Slow Dive or The Cure.